never broke. No one stayed. No one depended on him. No expectations were allowed to grow. The wind shifted. Cassian paused, narrowing his eyes. Something moved beyond the fence line, not an animal. A woman stepped into view, her coat worn thin at the sleeves. She held the hand of a small boy, no more than 4 years old. Both were dusty, exhausted, but upright. They did not wave. They did not shout. They simply stood. Cassian walked toward them slowly, boots crunching against gravel. "What do you want?" he asked. The woman lifted her chin. Her face was pale but steady. "Water," she said. "Just water. For him." She did not ask for food. She did not ask to stay. The boy stood quietly beside her. His cheeks were chapped, his eyes too serious for his age. He looked directly at Cassian, not with fear, but with a calm, searching attention. Something tightened in Cassian's chest. A memory stirred. Years ago, another child had looked at him that way. Cassian had believed in that look once. He had been wrong. He glanced toward the barn, toward the old woodshed, where a cast-iron stove still worked. "You can have water," he said. After a pause he added, "and a place to sleep." The woman's shoulders loosened slightly. "In the shed," Cassian continued, "there's a stove. One night only. You leave in the morning." She nodded immediately. Understood. Inside the shed, the stove was lit with dry kindling. Cassian left a blanket without comment. He stayed near the door, arms crossed, listening to the wind scrape against the boards. The woman introduced herself quietly as Mara. The boy was Noel. She thanked him once, no more. Night fell hard and cold. The fire burned low, throwing weak light across the rough walls. Mara lay curled on the blanket, sleep claiming her as soon as safety allowed. Her breathing slowed, evened out. Noel did not sleep. He sat close to the fire, knees drawn to his chest, watching the embers glow and dim. Cassian remained near the door, hat low over his eyes, pretending not to watch. Minutes passed. Then more. Noel turned his head. He did not look at his mother. He looked directly at Cassian. "Are you staying forever?" he asked softly. The question landed like a blow. Cassian stiffened. It was not a plea, not a childish fantasy. It was quiet, almost careful, as if the boy already knew how fragile answers could be. Cassian turned away. He bent down and placed another piece of wood into the stove. Sparks jumped briefly, then settled. He did not answer. The silence grew heavy, wrapping itself around the small space. Outside, the wind howled across the open land, carrying winter closer with every gust. Cassian straightened slowly. His jaw tightened. He had told himself he was only helping for a night. He had told himself this was nothing. But as the fire steadied, and the boy finally lay down beside his sleeping mother, a question rose inside Cassian that he had not allowed in years. If it were him standing there in the cold, would he hope someone stayed? The sun had not yet risen fully when Cassian stepped out onto the frost-bitten porch. His breath clouded in the morning chill. Ice clung to the corners of the barn roof, and the snow from the night before had hardened underfoot. He adjusted his coat, tugged his gloves tighter, and walked toward the old storage shed. From a distance, he could already hear the quiet rustle of movement. Mara was awake. Through the gap in the door, he saw her crouched beside her son, folding their blanket neatly. There was no sound of conversation, no dragging of feet or lazy lingering, just quiet efficiency. Cassian didn't announce himself. He stood just beyond the edge of the doorway, unseen, listening. "I think we're almost ready," Mara said softly. Noel, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, nodded and began folding his scarf. Cassian noted the boy's movements, small, careful, already practiced at not needing help. As they packed, Mara looked up toward the light coming through a crack in the wall and spoke, voice calm, almost flat. "My husband died from the cold," she said, not directed to anyone, just aloud. "We had a small piece of land, but the bank took it. I worked numbers for a ranch near Fallon. Got blamed for something in the books. They let me go." She didn't explain further. She didn't defend herself. Cassian didn't speak either. She lifted the bag over her shoulder. It was old and frayed at the seams. The boy slid the strap of a smaller satchel across his chest and picked up the last piece of bread from last night's meal. He broke it in half and handed the bigger piece to his mother. "Here, Ma." She hesitated, then took it with a nod, ruffling his hair. Noel looked around the shed once before stepping outside. His eyes lingered on the horses in the paddock. He didn't beg to ride. He didn't complain about the cold. He just looked and then turned away. Cassian remained at the fence line, arms crossed. The sun had barely warmed the horizon. As Mara and Noel approached, he said only, "Path's clearer this side, leads to the main road. You'll hit the trail south in a few hours." Mara nodded once. "Thank you again." Cassian said nothing, but before she could move past, he reached into the small crate by the shed and pulled out a pair of child's boots, scuffed but still sturdy, with the laces wrapped twice around the soles. He placed them by the door without a word. "These were extra," he muttered. "Might fit him." Mara paused. "We'll take care of them." He didn't look at her. Instead, he turned and walked toward the barn. They left without ceremony. No embraces, no extended farewells, just footsteps crunching in the frost. But Noel did something that caught Cassian's attention. At the edge of the property, just before the split in the trail, the boy turned. He looked back, not at the house, but at the shed. Then his gaze shifted to the barn, to the smoke from the chimney, and finally, to the man still standing alone with his back turned. Their eyes met for a moment. It wasn't a plea, just a look that said, "I remember." Cassian watched them go until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned, jaw tight, and headed back to the house. Inside, the coffee had gone cold. He reheated it over the stove, but the taste was off. He sat in his chair by the window, cup in hand, staring at the trail they had taken. It should have ended there. It had, for others. But this morning, the ranch felt quieter than usual. He could still see the boy's eyes, still hear the echo of that question from the night before. "Are you staying forever?" Cassian set the cup down, half full. The bitter coffee burned in his throat. Without another thought, he grabbed his coat and hat, stepped outside, hitched up the wagon, and took the reins. The road stretched ahead, untouched by new tracks. But he knew where they would be. He would find them. And maybe this time, he would not let them keep walking. Cassian found them not far down the trail, their forms hunched against the cold, Mara's hand resting lightly on Noel's shoulder as they walked. He reined in beside them. "I'm heading to town," he said, voice flat. "If you want to ride a ways, hop on." Mara hesitated. Her eyes searched his face for anything more than practicality. But there was nothing there, just the offer. She nodded, lifted Noel onto the wagon seat, then climbed up herself without a word. The road stretched long and pale under a washed-out sky. Snow still clung to the edges of the trail, mud slushed beneath the wheels. Cassian kept his focus ahead, reins firm in his gloved hands. The wind blew sharp over the open field. They passed a broken fence line. A long dead oak twisted toward the horizon, a place Mara had to notice. There was nothing else to look at. No one spoke for miles. When the rooftops of the town finally appeared, Cassian's hands tightened slightly on the reins. A few heads turned as the wagon rolled in. At the general store, Cassian pulled to a stop. He hopped down first, then helped Mara and Noel climb off. "You need anything, get it now," he said. "I'll be about an hour." She nodded again. Still no questions, still no requests. Inside the store, Cassian gathered his supplies: salt, flour, lamp oil, a new saddle strap. Outside, Mara stood by the post with Noel, the boy's small hand wrapped around the edge of her shawl. People passed. They looked, they whispered. "Another one." "Wandering widows never come alone, do they?" muttered a woman near the window. "Stray mouths to feed. That's what they are," her companion added. Cassian ignored it, or tried to. Near the back of the store, a familiar voice called, "Cassian." He turned. It was Harold Green, one of the oldest ranchers around, and a man who remembered too much. Harold approached slowly. "Saw you ride in with company," he said, not unfriendly but cautious. Cassian said nothing. Harold scratched his chin. "Reminds me of last time. That widow, what was her name? Clara? The one your wife vouched for?" Cassian didn't flinch. "Good woman, maybe, but the rumors, hell, they came hard. Stole from the till, folks said, and you got burned with the bank for helping, didn't you?" Cassian's jaw worked. "I'm just saying," Harold lowered his voice, "some people come with storms attached. You helped one before, paid for it." Cassian stepped back. "I remember." Harold sighed. "Be careful. That woman, she might be more trouble than you think." Cassian said nothing, but the knot in his chest tightened. When he returned to the front, he caught the store clerk arguing with someone outside. He stepped closer. "No credit. Not for folks I don't know," the clerk snapped. Mara stood quietly, holding a small bundle of oats and dried beans. Cassian spoke up. "She's with me." The clerk's eyes narrowed. "Then you're vouching, full tab, your name?" Cassian didn't hesitate. "Yes." The man raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yes," Cassian repeated. He pulled out his wallet and paid in full. Mara didn't speak until they were outside. Her fingers clutched the bundle to her chest. Her voice was quiet. "I did not mean for you to cover that." Cassian didn't look at her. "Doesn't matter. I can pay you back, once we find somewhere." "You don't owe me," he interrupted. Noel, silent until now, looked up at him, wide-eyed. Cassian handed him a small cloth-wrapped packet, a few pieces of dried fruit. "Eat this." The boy took it wordlessly. The wagon ride home was slower. The wind had shifted, heavier now. Clouds pressed low on the horizon. Cassian did not speak for the rest of the journey. But when they neared the fork in the road, the place where the main trail split away from his land, he did not stop. Mara turned to him. "You can let us off here." He kept driving. "No need. We'll finish the trip." She did not argue. And as the ranch came into view, familiar, quiet, windswept again, Cassian finally felt the full weight of what had happened. People had watched him, judged him, spoken of him. But he had stood beside her, publicly, not as charity, not out of guilt, but because, somewhere between frost and firelight, it had stopped being a choice. He had made a decision, even if he had not said it aloud. He would not let them walk alone again. Not when he could offer a way back. Not this time. The sun hung low as they approached the ranch, burning a fragile orange into the pale winter sky. Cassian guided the wagon up the familiar rutted track, each wheel leaving a shallow mark in the dust. He did not speak. Mara and Noel sat quietly on the seat beside him. Noel's small shoulders were wrapped in the thick blanket Cassian had given them. Mara's gaze lingered on the horizon, where the wind stirred the tall grass, and the first hints of dusk settled against the hills. The ranch looked unchanged, but Cassian felt the stillness differently now. The house did not loom empty. It waited, like a breath held just before a confession. When they reached the barn, Cassian helped them down and unloaded the few supply bags. Still, no words were spoken. The cold crept at the edges of the world, urging retreat toward warmth. Night came faster than Cassian expected. The sky darkened in muted shades of charcoal and purple. Inside the kitchen, a pot simmered over the stove, sending gentle warmth into the room. Mara was setting out cups for tea. Noel pressed his palms against the heat, watching the steam curl upward. Cassian excused himself, without explanation, and walked out toward the old shed. The night air was still sharp. The stars were bright in the open sky, but the wind stirred through the skeletal remains of the orchard, whispering of cold days past and days yet to come. He did not call for Mara. He did not say that they could stay. He did not offer what his heart had begun to hope, an invitation to stay. Instead, Cassian worked with quiet resolve. He found the places where cold drafts slipped through the gaps in the boards. With sturdy hands and worn tools, he sealed the cracks. Each nail driven home felt like a step in a direction he had not admitted to himself yet. Then he pulled an old fabric from his coat, a tattered piece Mara must have left behind earlier, and hung it along the doorway. It wasn't much, but it would slow the wind. He dragged a low wooden table to the center of the space and set it down gently, as though hoping it might coax warmth into the room. On top of it, he placed a small stack of blank papers and a tin of pencils he found stashed in the barn drawer. The final act was the simplest. He stared at the small, calloused hands of the table leg, then turned and walked away without so much as a backward glance. Warmth filled the shed later that night. The fire in the wood stove burned steady and bright, licking gently at the edges of the worn blankets. Noel stood close, head tilted, gazing at the tiny room that felt bigger than the last. His eyes took in the patched boards, the small table with paper neatly stacked on top, and the curtain that kept the cold from creeping in along the floorboards. He stepped toward the stove, rocking slightly on his heels, then lowered his voice, soft as a whisper. "If we leave, can we come back?" He didn't look at Cassian. He didn't need to. His question was small, careful, as though afraid his hope might shatter if spoken too loud. Cassian stood nearby, the brim of his hat casting a deep shadow over his face. He didn't answer with words. He didn't offer an assurance or a promise. Instead, he took a length of wood beside the fire and placed it gently onto the glowing embers. The fire hissed once in welcome, then settled into a warm, steady burn. Cassian moved to the door and pulled it shut, sealing the wind outside. Noel watched him. He didn't press for more. He simply turned and walked closer to the fire, sitting cross-legged near the warm center of the room. The glow from the stove washed over the walls, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to fill every empty corner. The temperature rose a few degrees. It was not yet a home, nothing so grand or declared, but it was warmer, not just in degrees, but in feeling. No one spoke again that night, but the room felt fuller, softer, more alive, and the fire burned without faltering, as though it had noticed something shift, small, subtle, yet undeniable. No promise had been made. No vow had been spoken. But the warmth stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. The wind had changed overnight. By morning, it came slicing down from the mountains, howling low across the empty plain, whipping the snow sideways in sharp, angry gusts. The barn creaked. The trees groaned. Overhead, the sky had gone a hard, metallic gray. Cassian stood outside, collar pulled high, watching the clouds settle low over the ridge. He latched the last of the barn doors and checked the hinges twice. Then, with a slow breath that hung in the frozen air, he turned toward the house. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen barely held against the creeping cold. Mara was packing again. She moved silently, folding the boy's coat, tucking away their few belongings beneath the wooden table. Noel stood nearby, small fingers tracing the frost on the window, quiet. Cassian did not step in. He watched from the hallway, unseen. Mara whispered, her voice almost too soft for the storm outside to hear. "We should leave before the snow traps us here." Noel looked up, but said nothing. He did not ask why. He understood, just as Cassian did. It was not that she wanted to leave. It was that she believed she had no right to stay. Cassian's jaw clenched. If he said nothing, they would disappear without a sound. Just like before, just like the others who had gone, and the one who never came back. But still, he stayed silent. By midday, the storm arrived. The ranch was swallowed whole by snow. White buried the fence lines. The sky became a wall. Wind screamed between the eaves, shook the window frames. The path to town vanished. They were trapped, 3 souls inside one weathered house. Cassian kept busy. He moved room to room, tightening shutters, tacking down rugs. He lit every stove, checked every latch, not for the house, not for himself. But because he kept thinking of the look on Mara's face when she packed, the way her hands moved like someone who expected to be told no before she even asked. He could not make her stay. But he could make it harder to leave. The second day of the blizzard, a rider came. Wrapped in furs, horse half frozen, he brought a message from town. The general store was low on supplies. Distribution would be rationed. No credit, no handouts, no exceptions. Cassian stood at the threshold of the barn, snow biting his skin, reading the slip of paper handed to him. "Name and signature," the rider said. "If you vouch for anyone, you're responsible. Any default, it comes out of your land." He didn't flinch. Didn't ask questions. He took the pencil, pressed the page against the post, and signed, Cassian Rourke. Clean strokes, steady hand, cold fingers. The rider squinted. 2 extra mouths in winters not light. "Sure about this?" Cassian didn't answer. But his name was already written. When the rider left, Cassian lingered outside. The cold gnawed through his coat, but he stayed, eyes scanning the barn, the windmill, the faint glow of firelight behind the kitchen window. He had done it. Not for charity, not for guilt. He had done it because this time, if someone was staying, it was because he had chosen them to stay. The road home was buried deep in snow, but his horse found the way. As the ranch came into view, the door creaked open. Noel stood there, bundled in 2 large sleeves, his blanket dragging at his feet. The boy's eyes locked on Cassian. Then, just like that first night, he asked nothing. He just smiled. Cassian dismounted, walked up the steps, and for a second, just 1 second, he let his hand rest on the boy's shoulder. No words. But that touch said it all. He had crossed the line. Not the line of weather or distance, but the one between solitude and belonging, between helping and keeping. The storm had passed. Snow lay thick and undisturbed across the fields, casting a pale glow under the moonlight. The sky was clear, dark blue, and still. Inside the ranch, the quiet was heavier than the cold. Cassian sat by the fireplace, the orange flames flickering low in the hearth. The warmth reached only so far, but it was enough for tonight. Across the room, Mara folded a blanket, then paused. Her hands rested on the edge of the fabric, unmoving. She looked at the fire, not at him. "When I left the last town," she began, voice quiet, "they did not ask why, they asked how long I'd stay." Cassian didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. "I was not looking for someone to save me, just a place that would not send us away." She smiled faintly, without humor. "That is harder to find than you'd think." Noel sat cross-legged on the floor, a sheet of paper balanced across his knees. His small hand moved slowly, pencil dragging careful lines. He did not look up, but his drawing was clear enough in the firelight. A house, a chimney, smoke curling into the sky, and 3 figures at the front, one tall, one small, one in between. Mara glanced down at the picture. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. Cassian followed her gaze. His throat tightened, but he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, not sharp anymore, but steady. He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped together, elbows on his knees. "I used to think helping meant distance," he said finally. "That if I called it charity, it wouldn't hurt when people left." Mara turned her head toward him, slowly. "My wife wanted to adopt," he continued, "a boy whose family never came for him. I said no. I told her we could not take on more than we were sure we'd keep." He stared at the flames. "She died that winter. Pneumonia. One morning she was coughing, by the next she was gone." The fire cracked. Neither of them moved. "After that, I made rules," he said. "No one stays, no one depends on me. No one gets left behind, because no one gets brought in." Mara's eyes shimmered, but she blinked slowly, steady. "I thought it made me strong, but it made me empty." He looked over at Noel, who was now shading in a sun above the house. The boy's brow was furrowed in concentration. Cassian's voice softened. "He draws a home like it's already his." Mara answered just above a whisper, "Because no one told him it wasn't." Cassian met her eyes then, really met them, not with suspicion, not with the guarded courtesy of a host, but as a man trying, finally, to see clearly. The moment held, fragile and unsaid. Not a promise, not yet, but something warmer than the fire between them. He leaned back slightly and nodded toward Noel's drawing. "He got the roofline wrong," he said quietly. Mara raised an eyebrow, almost smiling. "It slants north," Cassian added. "We can fix it in the morning." She looked at him for a long breath, then nodded once. In the quiet that followed, the flames popped and settled into a steady burn. No vows were spoken, no declarations made. But in that silence, something shifted. Cassian no longer saw them as strangers. He had stopped holding the door open just to push them out. And though he did not say it aloud, the truth sat heavy and solid in his chest. He had already started making space for them to stay. The snow began to recede in small, glittering patches, retreating into the shaded crevices of fence posts and the edges of the North Hill. The days grew longer, and the wind, though still cold, lost its sharpness. Life in the town stirred again. Wagons returned to the roads. Children resumed school. The whispers, however, never truly melted with the snow. Cassian first heard it from the blacksmith. "They say she's still there," the man muttered, not looking up from the glowing horseshoe he was hammering. "Some folks wonder why you keep her, what you're trying to prove." Cassian said nothing, but the words rooted in his mind like frost under old wood, quiet but deep. The rumors had grown louder lately. This time, they came wrapped not in curiosity but concern. The man who arrived at the ranch a few days later made that clear. He was well-dressed, boots polished, mustache neat, and carried himself like someone who rarely heard the word no. "Mr. Rourke," he greeted, standing in the yard with the confidence of someone offering a gift. "Just here to offer a hand." Cassian didn't invite him inside. The man went on. "The town's willing to help that woman, Mara, is it? And the boy. There's a place across the ridge, a dairy farm. They're looking for help, warm housing, predictable hours, no controversy." He smiled as if it were a kindness, as if it were mercy. "It'd take the burden off you, let you return to your way of things." Cassian's jaw set tighter with each word. "You've done your part," the man added, lowering his voice. "No one would fault you." The offer was simple, clean, and it struck directly at the places Cassian had long tried to bury. A way back to solitude, to safety, to stillness unmarred by others' needs or expectations. That night, the words echoed in his head as he sat alone at the kitchen table. The lamp flickered. The house, once quiet, now felt loud in its silence. He stared at the mug in his hands, but it had long gone cold. In the adjoining room, Mara read quietly beside the fire. Noel, curled up beside her, was asleep with one hand tucked beneath his cheek. Cassian could see their shadows flicker on the far wall. He rose without a word, went to the hallway, and opened the old drawer by the door. Inside lay the spare key to the main house, heavy, worn smooth from years of use. He picked it up and held it in his palm for a long moment. Then, with quiet steps, he entered the room. Mara looked up, startled but calm. She did not speak. Cassian walked forward, closed the distance between them, and placed the key gently into her hand. Her fingers curled around it slowly. He did not explain, did not dress the gesture with speeches or promises. There was no "you belong here," or "this is your home now." Just the key, and a choice. Then he turned to Noel, still half asleep under the throw blanket. Cassian crouched until they were eye level. His voice was steady, deliberate. "This is home," he said. "Not forever. Not if you want it. Just a truth. A quiet, present truth that carried more weight than any vow." Mara did not cry. She did not ask what changed. She simply looked at him as if something she had long kept, braced for, rejection, departure, a goodbye in the making, had finally lost its power. Cassian stood and left them there, in the warm light, the fire crackling behind him. Outside, the wind had died. The moon rose over the barn in silence. Cassian leaned against the door frame, breath fogging in the air. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in the quiet. He hadn't made a declaration. He hadn't signed his life away. But he had offered something harder. A choice. And a place that would stay. Not because of obligation, but because someone might choose it back. Spring arrived, slowly, quietly. The snow melted into the soil, leaving behind patches of green. Plum blossoms opened on the edge of the old fence, delicate and brief. The wind no longer bit. It carried the scent of damp earth and something new. The ranch was quieter, softer somehow. Life moved with rhythm, not urgency. Every morning, Noel set off for the small schoolhouse in town. He wore a wool coat just a bit too big and carried a satchel slung across his back. Mara packed him bread and fruit, slipping in a folded scrap of paper with a smiley face. Noel always smiled when he found it. Cassian watched him go from the porch, one hand resting on the railing, the other around a tin cup of coffee. He didn't wave. Noel didn't expect him to. But the boy always looked back once, just once, to check if Cassian was still there. He always was. At the ranch, Mara worked without being asked. She cooked simple, warm meals. She balanced the books with neat columns of numbers. She planted herbs and vegetables behind the house, tying markers on wooden stakes and humming as she worked. She filled the empty spaces without making noise, as if she had always been meant to be there. Cassian still said little, but his silences shifted. He came home at the same time each day, boots brushing off dust at the door. If a hinge creaked, he fixed it. If the barn roof dripped, he climbed up before the next rain. If Noel said something, anything, Cassian listened. Not with nods or smiles, but with stillness. And that was enough. One evening, after the sky turned lavender and the crickets began their chorus, Cassian stayed late in the shed behind the house. Noel peeked out the window, curious. The next morning, there was a new chair at the table, smaller than the others. Sanded smooth, made from spare wood. No one said anything.